If there's one thing Marvel fans love more than cameos from Andrew Garfield, it's speculating which big bad is going to ruin everyone's day next. One particular villain, Mephisto, has been on everyone's mind since the beginning of Phase 4, and we might just be close to finally seeing him on screen. Today, we're going to talk about the possibility of Mephisto appearing in Ironheart, and all the times that Marvel's Satan has been mentioned. First up, rumors say Borat might replace Dormammu as the next villain. Dormammu is a villain that has been severely underutilized in Marvel. The guy is literally one of the biggest threats in the comics universe. But so far, we've only seen him as a giant floating head in one Doctor Strange movie. Well, it looks like the bane of the mystic arts may just have to stay in the back seat, with rumors of Mephisto showing up in Ironheart running rampant through the internet. That's right, folks, the devil himself might just be coming to the Marvel universe. Speculation went wild after it was rumored that Sacha Baron Cohen of Borat fame might be slipping into some pretty red horns in order to wreak chaos in a whole brand new universe. This comes as a surprise to some, given that there are characters directly related to Dormammu set to appear in Ironheart, like the Hood. However, it probably won't be too much of a stretch given that Ironheart is going to focus on the idea of science versus the mystical arts, making Mephisto a solid shoe-in. Next, how is Mephisto going to fit into the MCU? Now, we've already talked about the Hood, and we think the character is the perfect way to introduce Mephisto into the MCU as a replacement for Dormammu. Basically, in the comics, the Hood, Parker Robbins, steals the cloak and boots of a demon who attacks him, gaining magical powers at the expense of him being possessed by Dormammu. Marvel wouldn't even have to change up the Hood's origin story overly much to help Mephisto slide into the MCU. Keep the boots, keep the cape, keep the horrifying, terrible demonic possession by a twisted evil figure, but just have said evil figure be the MCU's Satan instead of the master of mystical arts' ultimate nemesis. Beside the Hood, there's another major way Mephisto could be introduced into the cinematic universe. One of Marvel's most infamous storylines, Spider-Man One Day More, involves Peter Parker making a deal with Mephisto to save a dying Aunt May, in exchange for all of his and the world's memories of Mary Jane. The comic was a huge deal and impacted Spider-Man's story for decades to come in strange and unpredictable ways. You might recall that Tom Holland's Peter was in a pretty distraught state by the end of his last outing, having lost not just his aunt, but effectively everyone he ever cared for. If there was ever a time for the devil to make an appearance in his life and into the MCU, it's right now. Coming up, why Mephisto is such a big deal. Speculation about Mephisto showing up in the MCU was one of the biggest aspects of the Phase 4 rumor mill, especially during the early days of the phase. Every episode of WandaVision was scrutinized for hints of the Red Terror, with people being convinced he would show up as the main villain. The same speculation hit Loki and a bunch of other shows, showing that fans were desperate for any confirmation of the character's existence. Why are fans in such a wild tizzy over whether or not Mephisto is going to show up in the MCU? Well, we've already discussed how the character has impacted Spider-Man's life, but his influence over the Marvel Universe doesn't start there. Anytime a character is in a broken state or has a brush with dark magic, you can be sure Mephisto is going to be watching them, trying to figure out the best way to turn their lives into a living hell. Not only is he a treasure trove of potential story arcs for multiple characters, ranging from street-level characters like Spider-Man to powerhouses like Strange, but he also opens up a whole new location for the MCU, Hell. Of course, Hell is the realm that Mephisto rules over, meaning we might finally be able to see all the evils and monsters that it holds. Perhaps even certain characters be transported to Hell for brand new stories, opening up the possibility for characters like Ilyana Rasputin showing up. That's all the speculation we have for Mephisto's potential MCU debut. Now, let's look at all the times Mephisto has been hinted at in the MCU. First up, Mephisto's hint was earlier than any of us expected. Do you remember the old days of the MCU? Back in the good old Phase 1 heyday, we were seeing iconic characters on screen for the first time in living memory, and the idea that we could eventually see even more fan-favorite heroes and villains duke it out had everyone in a chokehold. It might surprise you then that Mephisto was hinted at all the way back in Phase 1, during the first Avengers movie. That's right, folks, we've had confirmation of the literal devil's existence in Marvel for over a decade now, and almost no one has been talking about it. Basically, during a particular scene where the Tesseract has been examined, Mephisto's name shows up on the Tesseract file that is being read, with a description for the object clearly having Mephisto's name in it. This is big for a number of reasons. First, it confirms that Mephisto may have been behind the scenes manipulating events in the MCU before we even got our first whiff of red. Second, it shows that S.H.I.E.L.D. has been aware of Mephisto's existence for some time and might even have contingency plans in place for his emergence. These contingencies might come up in a big way as the key to defeating Mephisto once he decides to show everyone his ugly mug. Following that, WandaVision was full of Mephisto imagery. WandaVision may just have been the show that started the alarm bells ringing in fans' heads for the possible arrival of Marvel's bad boy, given that it was chock full of hints that could generously only be referred to as satanic. For one thing, let's talk about the constant references to the number 6. 666 is usually considered to be the number of the devil, since it's meant to represent the time when he's strongest. The same number was thrown around constantly during WandaVision, with it appearing on a toaster in an early episode. Besides that, the shape of the hex Wanda places in Westview is 6-sided, another obvious hint of the devil's existence. On top of that, some names in the show even seem to hint that Mephisto would eventually drop by to make an appearance. For example, Agatha's rabbit, Scratchy, is probably a reference to the devil, since Old Scratch is a classic 1800s name for the devil, as popularized by Irving's The Devil and Tom Walker. The pattern doesn't end there, with the Westview Theater, the Coronet Theater, also being named after a poem about a man who meets the biblical serpent form of Satan. Interestingly, it's even been speculated that Wanda's twins, the ones she's created out of magic, may have been Mephisto's doing. After all, the character has messed with Wanda's family in the comics. What's stopping him from doing the same in the MCU? Up next, Loki's helmet might not have been the only thing on the show with horns. Loki came out at a point where WandaVision had already set the Mephisto fever into motion, so you best believe that fans were poring over every frame of every scene in an attempt to exact some sort of proof of the devil's existence. Well, they didn't have to wait for very long, with a stained glass window depicting the character showing up early into the series. Now, while it may have just been a general depiction of the devil, the design and appearance seemed to indicate that it was Mephisto, or at least some interpretation of Mephisto. After all, there's a precedent in the MCU for members of pantheons to actually just be dudes with insane power from other races. Finally, She-Hulk pulls the hell out of a hat. We didn't really expect to see a Mephisto reference in a lighthearted show like She-Hulk, but we guess the universe has a way of surprising us. In episode 4, a magician's assistant is transported to hell and returns with a heart in her hand, which she says belonged to a goat named Jake. Now, goats are a pretty common part of satanic imagery, with the Lord of Darkness usually being shown having goat's legs or a goat. Not only that, but the name Jake might be a hint as well. Jake is one of the names used to refer to Satan, so it's possible that the insanely drunk assistant just straight up misremembered what the name was and said something similar to it. That's all the latest Marvel news we have for you on this fine day. Do you think that Mephisto's appearance in the MCU is inevitable? How is he going to fit into the current phase? If you enjoyed our content, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification icon. See you next time.